He never imagined that the moment he happily put on a uniform, ready to win glory on the battlefield and serve his country, his sister would show no joy at all. She even slammed the dough down in anger, making a heavy thud. After a long silence, his sister spoke again, trying to persuade Walter to stay. Their parents had died young, and the siblings had depended on each other since childhood. His sister, who had always protected Walter with all her heart, only wanted him to live safely, start a family, and build a steady life. To keep Walter from leaving, she even had her husband build a hidden room inside the house. She told Walter that as long as he hid in that secret room, even if government troops came searching, they would never find him. And once the war was over, no one would come after him for desertion anymore. But how could young, hot-blooded Walter, still chasing a hero's dream, understand his sister's painstaking love? He still ignored her pleas and turned away with absolute determination, seeing that she could not change Walter's mind. His sister could only run out of the room and hold him tightly. She prayed that Walter would return safely. Then she stood there helplessly, watching the brother she loved most slowly disappear from her sight. At that moment, Walter had said goodbye to his family, and of course his heart was full of reluctance, but deeper inside him, there was even more joy and excitement, because charging across the battlefield was almost every young boy's burning dream, and just like that, he boarded a military train carrying supplies to the front, slowly moving closer to the dream burning in his heart. After traveling for who knows how long, the train suddenly slowed to a stop. Curious, Walter immediately jumped down and asked what had happened. The wary conductor looked around as he told him the train had only stopped to take on water, because the partisans were active in the area. Stopping at night was safer. Seeing the conductor so tense, Walter found it hard to believe. In his mind, this place should have been the rear area under German control. If they had to be this nervous even here, did soldiers at the front have to sleep with one eye open? Just then, the conductor suddenly noticed someone approaching in the distance. Walter quickly turned around as well, and saw a young, beautiful girl slowly walking toward them. The cautious conductor immediately shouted at her and ordered her to leave. The girl innocently asked if she could catch a ride for a short distance. Without another word, the conductor flatly refused, but the girl took out a little money and said it was all she had. She knew it was not enough for a ticket. Still, she begged the conductor to show some kindness and take her along, but no matter what the girl said, the conductor refused to let her board, because this military train was carrying nothing but supplies for the front line. To prevent any risk, the conductor would not allow anyone except German military personnel on board, and besides, she was a strange girl who had come out of nowhere. In the end, the helpless girl had no choice but to turn and leave. Kind-hearted Walter watched her walking away, then turned and tried to persuade the conductor to let her on, but to his surprise, he was also rejected without hesitation. With no other option, Walter could only silently curse the conductor for being cold-blooded, cruel, and heartless. Before long, the train began to move, and Walter suddenly noticed that the girl was still looking at the train with desperate longing, hoping to get on. After thinking for a moment, the kind-hearted Walter decisively reached out and pulled her onto the train. Looking at the young and beautiful girl before him, inexperienced Walter thought love had finally arrived. What he did not know was that the girl he had pulled onto the train was actually a female partisan fighting against the Germans. The girl could also see what Walter was thinking, so she began smiling at him again and again, her tone soft and flirtatious. When Walter learned that she disliked the smell of cigarettes, he threw the cigarette in his hand straight out the window. The girl kept talking with Walter, trying to win his trust. Her tone and gaze were so intimate. It was as if they were already lovers who had loved each other for years. She even lied and said she was feeling a little tired. Then she simply rested her head on Walter's shoulder. This sudden illusion of happiness instantly pulled Walter into a dreamlike sweetness of love. Just as Walter fully lowered his guard and drifted into a deep sleep, the girl seized her chance and quickly took a sealed can from her bag. Then she slowly stood up, preparing to place this special bomb on the nearby rack. But at that exact moment, Walter suddenly woke up. The terrified girl immediately froze in place, forcing herself to stay calm. She turned around and continued talking to Walter, but Walter suddenly asked her what was inside the can. His unexpected question left the girl unsure how to answer. After thinking for a moment, she finally said slowly that the can held her brother's ashes. Just then, the train suddenly braked and stopped moving. Walter quickly got up and looked outside. He saw a squad of German soldiers preparing to board the train and inspect the cars. The girl took the chance to place the can containing the special bomb on the train rack. because this military train was a special German supply train. All non-German military personnel were forbidden from riding it. So Walter quickly pushed open the door on the other side and told the girl to get off and hide from the inspection. Seeing how much Walter cared about her, and thinking about the special bomb she had just left on the train, the guilt-ridden girl finally gave Walter a kiss. If not for the war, perhaps she really would have fallen in love with kind-hearted Walter. Unfortunately, there are no ifs in this world. Then the girl quickly jumped off the train and hid behind a nearby haystack. Soon, the German soldiers boarded the train and began a strict inspection of every car. When the inspection ended and the train was about to start again, Walter immediately leaned by the door and called out to the girl. But no matter how he called, he never received any response. Looking into the distance, he finally realized the girl had already fled quickly toward the woods. Helpless, Walter could only stand by the door and watch her go. He watched his brief little love story slowly disappear from sight. After the girl left, Walter had nothing to do, so he lay down and slept to pass the time. After who knows how long, the train suddenly exploded. Fortunately, the girl had placed the bomb far away from Walter, and that was how Walter narrowly survived. He struggled from the wreckage until his head emerged from the rubble. Only at that moment did he understand the girl's true identity. Only then did he realize how absurd and ridiculous he had been. Drowning in so-called love just moments ago, he pushed away the debris pressing down on him with all his strength. Before he could even catch his breath, he suddenly heard a noise outside the car. Then, through a crack in the wreckage, he saw a figure slowly approaching him. Panicked, Walter hurriedly searched for his rifle. Then he quickly worked the bolt, loaded the weapon, and prepared to fight the enemy to the last breath. But he soon discovered that the person was not an enemy, but a German soldier. It turned out this soldier was part of a nearby railway patrol. After hearing the explosion while on patrol, he had rushed over to check it out. As he spoke, the soldier reached out and pulled Walter out of the car with all his strength. They had just jumped down from the wreckage when they saw a group of anti-German partisans quickly approaching the train. Seeing this, the two men immediately got up and fled. They did not keep running forever, but hid behind a dead tree nearby and quietly watched. They saw the partisans working like busy little ants, hauling supplies off the train with all their strength. Without another word, Walter raised his gun, ready to shoot at the partisans, but to his surprise, the soldier beside him immediately stopped him. He got up and led Walter away, preparing to regroup with his comrades. But when they arrived, they found that the soldier's comrade was already lying motionless on the ground. He had become a corpse. At the soldier's pleading, Walter had no choice but to help him carry the body back to the railway patrol camp. When the others saw them return, the remaining patrol members immediately gathered around. The captain, long used to seeing death, calmly ordered two of his men to bury the body. Then he forcibly drafted Walter into his patrol unit to replace the man they had just lost. Walter quickly explained that he had to report to Battalion 637 and could not stay here, but the captain said that here, he was the commanding officer, and Walter had to obey his orders. As he spoke, the captain even took Walter to the phone and formally reported to his superior that Walter was being assigned as the replacement. The superior on the other end agreed to the captain's request without hesitation, and just like that, Walter somehow ended up joining this railway patrol made up of only 6 soldiers and 1 officer. Then, citing fire safety, the captain confiscated Walter's last remaining pack of cigarettes. The captain also said he wanted to test the quality of the safety door. At the same time, he wanted the newly arrived Walter to experience the reality of life here. He told Walter to close the iron door and stand behind it. While Walter was still completely confused, the captain raised his gun and began firing wildly at the iron door. This sudden safety inspection and life lesson caught Walter completely off guard. Helpless, he could only cover his head, curl up behind the door, and wait for the captain to finish this absurd safety test. Early the next morning, Walter and a soldier named Wolfgang began Walter's first railway patrol mission. Their job was to patrol the railway, but Wolfgang led him cautiously through the area near the tracks. Moving slowly through the woods, Wolfgang told him that they used to patrol along the railway, but they were always ambushed by partisans. So now, most of the time, they traveled through the forests. As long as they could see the railway from a distance, that was good enough. Halfway through the patrol, Wolfgang also said he would take Walter into town for a proper little outing. But when Walter followed Wolfgang past the town with high expectations, Wolfgang only led him to lie down in the woods and watch the town from far away. Then he began imagining how free it would feel to stroll through the town. Curious, Walter asked why they did not just go there directly. Wolfgang told him there were at least 100 anti-German partisans in this area, and their entire squad had only 7 people. If they walked openly into town, it would basically be suicide. Listening to Wolfgang, Walter fell silent. Walter knew the German army was already in a weak position and losing ground, but he never expected it to be this weak. After staring at the town and imagining it for a while, the two continued patrolling near the railway. Before long, they unexpectedly spotted 2 partisans. Because there were only 2 of them, Wolfgang decided that he and Walter would each take 1 shot and kill both partisans. Just as Walter was about to raise his gun, he suddenly saw another person behind the 2 partisans, and that person was the very girl who had secretly planted the bomb on the train and kissed him before getting off. Although that bomb had nearly taken his life, the kiss she gave him before leaving still lingered in Walter's mind like fine wine. After thinking it over, he finally acted decisively and stopped Wolfgang just as he was about to shoot at the girl. When Wolfgang asked in confusion why Walter had stopped him from firing, Walter did not know how to answer. He could only use something another comrade had once said, claiming that partisans were like annoying flies and could never be killed off anyway. Then the two ended their patrol and prepared to return to camp, but they unexpectedly ran into a strange man again. When the man saw them, he immediately raised his hands in panic. After confirming that there was no one else nearby, Walter and Wolfgang carefully approached him. After Walter searched him thoroughly and confirmed he had no weapon, the kind-hearted Walter told Wolfgang that the man was probably just an ordinary civilian. Just as the two were about to let the man go, 2 other teammates unexpectedly appeared not far away. Walter quickly told them that the man was probably just a civilian, but his teammates said nothing and insisted on taking the man back to camp for strict questioning. Helpless, Walter could only watch as the man was escorted back to camp. The captain, who spent his days doing nothing in camp, immediately perked up when he saw they had brought back a strange man. He ordered the soldiers to lock the man up first. After dinner, he would interrogate him properly. Sure enough, the moment dinner ended, the delighted captain ordered Walter to bring over the man they had captured that afternoon. Walter had no choice but to obey and go to the man. The man began begging Walter in broken German to let him leave. He said he was just an ordinary civilian and did not want to die here. Listening to the man's pleas, Walter hesitated, because Walter had personally experienced the captain's madness the day he arrived. He could not imagine what such an unstable captain might do during an interrogation. While he was still hesitating, another soldier suddenly appeared. With no choice left, Walter reluctantly brought the man before the captain. Then Walter stood to the side in deep unease, quietly watching the captain interrogate him. But to his surprise, the captain was smiling, and his tone was friendly. He even warmly took out a cigarette he had been saving and offered it to the man. With that smile, the captain asked the man to admit that he was an anti-German partisan. But how could the man confess so easily? He simply sat there in silence, not saying a word. Then the captain suddenly exploded, slapping the man again and again with sharp cracks. After who knows how long, he pressed his forehead tightly against the man's forehead. After silently sensing him with his forehead for a moment, the captain calmly said the man was not lying. He was not a partisan. Then the captain even said he would release the man. The man was completely baffled by this mentally unstable captain. He stared at the captain in disbelief. Only after the captain repeated that he was free to go did the man scramble to his feet and hurry out of the room. Seeing the man leave, kind-hearted Walter finally let out the breath he had been holding. But the very next second, the captain suddenly got up and chased after him. He shot the man dead on the spot. Then he turned to his man and said his intuition told him the man was definitely a partisan. Wolfgang, who had long had enough of the captain's unstable torment, directly cursed him as a madman. Before he could finish, the captain shoved the barrel of his gun into Wolfgang's mouth. Then the captain said his intuition told him Wolfgang was an accomplice of the partisans. As soon as those words came out, Wolfgang desperately begged the captain to spare him, but with the gun in his mouth, he could not get a single word out. At the critical moment, Walter spoke up quickly to save Wolfgang's life, saying the man who had just been killed must have been a partisan. All of them could testify to it. That man had been carrying a bomb and a pistol. Hearing Walter's words, the captain finally let Wolfgang go. After the captain left, Walter and Wolfgang walked over to the body of the man who had just been killed. They stood there in silence for a long time. Walter softly asked Wolfgang whether the man would still be alive if they had let him go earlier. Wolfgang glanced at Walter but said nothing, and because of that man's death, Walter fell into painful guilt and self-blame. He never imagined that less than 3 days after joining the railway patrol, His new friend Wolfgang would already be trying to take him along to defect to the Soviet army. Kind-hearted Walter could not just watch Wolfgang become a traitor to their homeland. He tried every possible way to convince Wolfgang to stay, but Wolfgang had nearly died the previous night under the mad captain's gun. He could no longer endure a life where he had to watch out for partisans outside and suffer the mad captain's abuse back in camp. He had made up his mind to leave the German army and this patrol unit that had completely crushed his spirit. Helpless, Walter brought up Wolfgang's mother. He told Wolfgang that if he defected to the Soviets, he might never see his mother again. His mother was Wolfgang's deepest attachment back in Germany. Just as Wolfgang hesitated because of his mother, Walter seized the chance and grabbed him with all his strength. He pulled Wolfgang back into the German side, but that night, Walter again noticed that Wolfgang, who had wanted to join the Soviets during the day, seemed to be secretly writing something. To make sure his friend completely gave up the idea of defecting, Walter walked over and continued to comfort him sincerely. When he asked Wolfgang what he was writing, Wolfgang calmly said he was writing a letter to his mother, but the next second, Wolfgang threw what he had just written straight into the fire. Seeing this, Walter did not keep asking what had been written on the paper. To stop Wolfgang from sneaking away at night to defect to the Soviets, Walter did not dare close his eyes all night. As a result, the next day, while he was on guard duty, he drifted off in a daze. After who knows how long, a gun was suddenly pressed against his head. Panicked, he immediately opened his eyes and begged the other person not to shoot, but instead, he heard a soft laugh. He quickly turned his head and discovered that the person standing before him was the girl who had planted the bomb on the German supply train days earlier. Although he had nearly been killed by the bomb on that train, Walter somehow could not bring himself to hate the girl who had planted it. But as a German soldier, he still instinctively looked for a chance and quickly raised his gun. Now he could finally ask the girl face to face whether she had meant to blow him up along with the train. Hearing Walter's question, the girl said nothing. She only lowered the gun in her hand on her own, but Walter kept pressing her. With no choice, the girl answered that she had only wanted to blow up the train, not hurt Walter, but the girl knew perfectly well that Walter had been on the train at the time, so blowing up the train was basically the same as blowing up Walter. Faced with such a contradictory answer, Walter said nothing more. Then the girl slowly shifted her body and sat down on the ground in a relaxed way. She looked as if she were on a little picnic date with Walter in the woods. Seeing this, Walter also slowly lowered his gun and sat down across from her. And just like that, the two began talking back and forth. Over the next few days, they often met secretly in the woods. Soon, the two people who had already grown fond of each other cast aside politics and war, and everything around them. Without hesitation, they lit the spark of love. Walter thought he and the girl might keep the secret happiness going, but that afternoon, just after saying goodbye to her and preparing to return to camp, he suddenly heard a noise not far away. He immediately hid behind a tree in panic. Then he gathered his courage and quickly ran behind a nearby slope. After that, he nervously worked the bolt, loaded his rifle, and slowly poked his head out to look around. Sure enough, before long, he saw a boy carrying a gun walking quickly toward him. Walter's instincts told him the boy had to be a partisan, but looking at that young face, one that seemed not even fully grown, Walter suddenly hesitated. He kept praying under his breath that the boy would not come closer, but the boy still walked toward him step by step. As the distance grew shorter, the boy also spotted Walter. At that life-or-death moment, Walter finally pulled the trigger. Then he slowly stood up and cautiously approached the boy. At that moment, Walter was filled with guilt, because he had killed a boy who might not even have been an adult. But what he did not know was that he had not only killed an underage boy, the boy was also the younger brother of the girl he had just fallen deeply in love with, and that brother was the only family the girl had left in the world. But at this moment, Walter still had no idea who the boy really was. A German soldier never imagined that he had only wanted to jump into the river for a bath. But the moment he entered the water, he was suddenly attacked by several partisans. He struggled desperately underwater, trying to escape by diving away. But in the end, he was still hit by a bullet and became a body left forever beneath the water. His comrades knew nothing about it and were still waiting in camp for him to return for dinner. Only when he still had not returned late into the night did everyone realize that something might have happened to him, because partisan activity nearby was rampant, and the captain wanted to prevent other soldiers from being ambushed. He did not send any other man out in the middle of the night to search for the soldier who had died in the water. Instead, he picked up the phone, preparing to report a missing soldier to his superiors, but he discovered that the phone line had already been cut by the partisans. Furious, he could only slam down the phone while cursing. Early the next morning, the captain ordered 2 men to go out and search for the soldier who had been missing all night. Walter, meanwhile, was ordered to go out alone and repair the phone line. After searching for a while, he finally found the spot where the line had been cut. Just as he bent down to repair it, he suddenly sensed a sound behind him. Panicked, he immediately turned around, raised his gun, and looked warily into the distance. He saw a girl standing not far away, staring at him, and this girl was Wanda, the woman he had fallen in love with just days earlier. The moment he saw his lover Wanda, the panic in Walter's heart instantly vanished. He quickly bent down again and continued repairing the line, but Wanda told him there was no need to fix it anymore. It turned out Wanda herself had cut the phone line, and she had stayed here intending to ambush the German soldier who came to repair it, but by accident. The one who came was Walter. These star-crossed lovers had finally reached the moment when they had to make a painful choice because of the enemy countries they each belonged to. Wanda told Walter that the partisans were already preparing to completely wipe out the camp where he was stationed. She begged Walter not to return to camp for the time being. She did not want the Walter she loved to die under partisan gunfire. She wanted to hide Walter away and keep him from being hunted by the partisans. But how could Walter abandon the other comrades in camp just so he could survive? Although he also wanted to stay by Wanda's side day and night, after hesitating again and again, he still ignored Wanda's pleas and resolutely turned toward his camp. He ran with everything he had, not daring to stop for even a second, because he had to tell his comrades as soon as possible that the partisans were about to attack their camp's stronghold. Before long, however, he suddenly heard someone whistling at him. Panicked, he immediately crouched down and kept watch. He saw someone not far away lying in the grass and waving at him. These 2 were the comrades who had gone out that morning to search for the missing soldier. Walter quickly told them the information he had learned. To avoid being ambushed by partisans on the way back, they decided to split up. One comrade would take the shorter path back to camp. Walter and Wolfgang would run back along the main railway road. Wolfgang, who had once wanted to leave the German army and join the Soviets, seized the chance to persuade Walter once again to defect with him. Hearing his friend's words, Walter turned around angrily. He said nothing, only stared hard at Wolfgang. Then Wolfgang slowly came closer and sincerely begged Walter again to leave with him. Walter knew that returning to camp this time would almost certainly be a death sentence, because without the missing soldier and Wolfgang, who was about to leave, only 5 people remained in the camp. No matter what they did, they could never hold that stronghold. Leaving with Wolfgang might be his only hope of survival. But after hesitating for a moment, he refused his friend Wolfgang, just as he had refused his lover. Seeing this, Wolfgang could only turn around and walk alone down the lonely road of defecting to the enemy. Walter knew that after this farewell, they would no longer be friends, but enemies. But powerless to stop it, he could only stand there and watch his friend walk farther and farther away. Just then, the comrade who had taken the shortcut suddenly appeared. It turned out he had been ambushed on the path to escape with his life. He had even lost his rifle. The comrade looked at Wolfgang in the distance and asked in confusion why he was running toward the Soviet positions. Walter glanced back at Wolfgang but did not answer. Instead, he grabbed his comrade and led him back to camp. When Walter and his comrade finally raced back to the camp stronghold with all their strength, they suddenly discovered that the partisans had already taken it. The captain and the 2 soldiers left behind had all been captured, and the slopes around them were covered with partisans. Seeing this, helpless Walter could only slowly raise his hands and surrender his weapon, but the comrade beside him did not raise his hands. Although the comrade had just lost his weapon, he still angrily cursed at the partisans. The next second, he was knocked to the ground with a brutal punch. Walter, who had raised his hands in surrender, was furious seeing his comrade beaten, but could only slowly hand over his weapon. Then, under the partisans' orders, he removed his helmet and equipment. This German railway patrol unit, now reduced to just 5 men, all became prisoners of the partisans. Then the partisan leader began a simple interrogation of the 5 prisoners. The partisan leader demanded to know who had killed a boy carrying a gun in the woods the previous afternoon. Hearing the question, Walter froze instantly, because yesterday, he was the one who had shot the boy the partisan leader was talking about. While his heart was in complete panic, the leader, trying to find the killer, had already raised his gun to make an example of someone. Seeing that the comrade who had just cursed the partisans was about to die under the leader's gun, Walter suppressed his fear and finally admitted that he had personally shot the boy. Once Walter confessed, the leader ordered his men to take away the other 4 German soldiers. Then he came to Walter and quickly raised his gun. At that moment, Walter knew he was sure to die. Powerless, He could only stand there helplessly and quietly wait for the fatal bullet. But to his surprise, the partisan leader did not shoot in the end. Instead, he slowly backed away and gradually left. Watching the leader walk off, Walter was full of confusion. While he was still baffled, he suddenly heard a familiar voice behind him. He slowly turned around and discovered that standing behind him was his lover Wanda. Without a word, Wanda decisively raised her gun. Only then did Walter finally understand. The boy he had killed in the woods yesterday was actually Wanda's younger brother. After learning the truth, Walter did not know what to say. He only looked at Wanda in silence, his eyes filled with guilt and self-blame. He never imagined that fate would play such a huge, absurd joke on him. After a long silence, Walter apologized to his lover, but Wanda only kept telling him to shut up. Helpless and guilty, he slowly lowered his hands. With despair and grief all over his face, he told Wanda to shoot him dead. But looking at Walter, the man she loved, Wanda began to hesitate, because she knew Walter had only killed her brother because he had no other choice. And deep in her heart, she still loved Walter. The happy, tender moments they had shared before surfaced in her mind again. They had even promised each other that they would both be careful and stay alive. Once the war ended, they would go to a peaceful place, build a home, marry, and have children. But fate had written this ending for them ahead of time. After hesitating again and again, she finally pulled the trigger. Then, burning with grief and anger, she drove Walter away. When Walter came back to his senses, he quickly turned and fled in panic. He looked back at Wanda once, then kept running. He knew that Wanda had not just shot past him, she had killed the promise and love they once shared. He also knew that from this moment on, Wanda had nothing more to do with him, and the only thing he could do now was run. Run with every bit of strength he had. He stood in the woods, pacing and looking around in all directions. Confusion, despair, helplessness, and guilt filled every cell in his body. Beneath the crushing current of a brutal era, he struggled with all his strength, but in the end, he was still ground down until both body and soul were shattered. He slowly raised his head and looked up at the sky, but saw not the slightest trace of hope. At that moment, he suddenly thought of his sister. To return once more to his hometown and stand before his sister again, he forced himself up and ran in the direction of home. After walking for who knows how long, he suddenly sensed someone shooting at him. He turned around in panic and saw several Soviet soldiers standing behind him. With no way out, he could only follow the Soviets' gestures and slowly approach them with his hands raised. Then he obediently knelt on the ground. He shook his head while begging the Soviet soldiers to spare him. Although he eventually survived by sheer luck under the Soviet guns, he was still sent to a prisoner of war camp. Here, anyone with frostbite or illness serious enough to lose the ability to work would be removed without hesitation by the Soviets. At this point, Walter had completely lost the proud ambition he had when he first enlisted, dreaming of glory and fighting for his country. Right now, he only wanted to survive. He only wanted to return alive to his hometown and to his sister's side. He wanted to live the kind of steady life he once thought was ordinary, but was actually full of happiness. But the wound on his foot was getting worse and worse. He secretly prayed that the Soviet soldier in charge of inspection would not notice the injury on his foot. But the next second, the careful Soviet inspector still shone the light onto his face. That beam of light instantly plunged Walter's vision into darkness. He knew he was surely going to die today. To prove that the frostbite on his foot would not affect his ability to move, Walter struggled up with all his strength. He wanted to win himself even the tiniest chance to live, but after struggling for a long time, he still failed to stand. Then several Soviet soldiers slowly walked toward him, preparing to drag him away. Walter helplessly begged them to spare his life, but the Soviets remained merciless, determined to have him removed. He cried out desperately, but still could not change the fate that was about to swallow him. At the moment between life and death, a Soviet soldier suddenly rushed out and stopped the man, saving Walter. Walter turned his head in disbelief. He saw that the person who had saved him was Wolfgang, the man who had once wanted to take him along to defect to the Soviets. Walter never imagined that he would meet Wolfgang, the defector, again under these circumstances. He immediately wrapped his arms tightly around Wolfgang. At that moment, he was not only holding his former friend, he was also holding the only lifeline that could save him now. His friend Wolfgang quickly got up and told the Soviet officer that this man was his good friend. Back then, Walter had also wanted to defect to the Soviets with Wolfgang, but because of certain circumstances, he had not managed to leave the German camp. He would definitely become a good comrade of the Soviet army too. Seeing this, Walter quickly nodded as well, saying that he wanted to join the Soviet army. After Wolfgang begged again and again, the Soviet officer finally agreed to spare Walter for the time being. And just like that, Walter narrowly survived for now. Then Wolfgang sent him to a hospital for treatment, but after entering the hospital, Walter began to regret it, because he did not truly want to join the Soviet army. He did not want to betray his own country. He had nodded and agreed only to stay alive, because he had no choice. But his friend Wolfgang tried to persuade him, saying that the German army had invaded the Soviet Union first. The German army were the aggressors. Their defection to the Soviets was not a betrayal of their country. It was a way to make up for the sins committed by all the Germans who had done wrong. But no matter how his friend tried to persuade him, Walter still refused to join the Soviet army. Yet he also knew that refusing to join meant death. He did not want to die, and he did not want to betray his country. In an instant, he was trapped in a brutal choice. As the day of his discharge drew closer, to avoid being sent back to the prisoner of war camp, to survive, and to return to his sister's side, he had no choice but to pretend, for the time being, that he agreed to join the Soviet army. He originally planned to find a chance later to escape from the Soviets, but as soon as his foot injury had recovered, the Soviet officer brought him to the Soviet front line. The officer ordered him to use a loudspeaker to persuade the German soldiers across the line to surrender. Helpless, Walter hesitated for a very long time, because he knew that the moment he opened his mouth, he would become a sinner who had betrayed his homeland. There would be no turning back. But right now, in order to survive, he had no other choice. In the end, to stay alive, he began urging the German soldiers to surrender. He told his own story, and even played German music. He tried to stir up homesickness in the German soldiers on the other side. After his relentless effort, dozens of German soldiers across the line, who had been holding out while almost out of ammunition and supplies, slowly walked out. They laid down their weapons and surrendered to the Soviets. Seeing his own countrymen kneeling before the Soviets, Walter felt as if he were looking at himself. And because he had successfully persuaded them to surrender, he earned the approval of the Soviet officer. When he asked what would happen to the man who had surrendered, the Soviet officer simply said 3 words: prisoner of war camp. At that moment, Walter regretted what he had done, because he knew what Soviet prisoner of war camps were like. Entering a Soviet POW camp meant facing death every single day. But no matter how much he regretted it, he no longer had any chance to make it right, because with his own hands, he had sent those countrymen into a hell on earth. At this moment, he had fully become a defector. He could only keep walking farther and farther down the road of betrayal. The Soviet officer even personally raised a toast to him, praising him for abandoning darkness and choosing the light. Walter thought he might now be able to start a new life as a Soviet soldier, but the shame and guilt of betraying his country tortured every cell in his body day and night. His friend Wolfgang, who had also defected and betrayed their country, could only comfort Walter's tormented heart again and again with every reason he could think of. Walter stayed in the Soviet camp like this for a week, until one night, at a Soviet banquet, he unexpectedly saw a familiar figure. It was Wanda, the lover who had tried to shoot him months earlier to avenge her brother, but had spared him in the end. Walter thought that after accidentally killing Wanda's brother, he would never see her again in this life. But fate once again allowed their lives to cross, and when Wanda turned her head, she also saw Walter staring blankly at her. The moment she saw Walter, Wanda's calm heart was stirred again. She forced down the chaos in her heart and kept singing. As soon as the performance ended, she got up in a panic and left the banquet. After their last separation, she had intended never to see Walter again, but the reunion fate had just arranged for them caught her completely off guard. For a moment, she did not know how to face it, so the only thing she could do was run. Run from the banquet, run from Walter, run from the sweetness they once shared, and from the hatred she could not forgive. But what she did not expect was that Walter chased after her with everything he had. Walter followed her all the way, finally arriving directly at Wanda's place. He suppressed the storm of emotions already raging inside him and slowly walked toward Wanda's room. He stood outside the door, hesitating for a long time. In the end, he slowly opened the door. These two lovers, who had once loved each other deeply, now stood face to face, silently looking at one another. Neither of them said a word. Then Walter slowly walked toward Wanda. As he approached, he once again sincerely explained that he had had no choice when he accidentally shot her brother. At this moment, Wanda did not know whether she had truly forgiven Walter in her heart, but she understood with absolute clarity that deep down, she had always loved Walter, and so these two suffering lovers came together once again. In this moment, there was no war, no past, and no hatred, There were only two poor lovers who wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. After a tender night, the two began telling each other what they had gone through over the past few months. Only then did Walter understand that Wanda's life over these months had not been easy either. Because Wanda was Polish, they wanted to establish a truly independent and free Polish government. So the Polish partisan unit Wanda belonged to had always refused to join the Soviet-backed Polish puppet government. In the end, the entire partisan unit had been wiped out by the Soviets 2 months earlier, and because Wanda was young and beautiful, with a lovely singing voice, she was lucky enough to survive. She was brought back to the Soviet camp, where she performed singing and dancing every day. It turned out Wanda was just like him, forced to betray her own country and join the Soviets simply to survive. That night, Wanda went on stage to perform again, watching her force a smile and sing with all her strength on the stage. Walter's heart was filled with complicated emotions, so after the performance ended, he decided to take Wanda with him and escape the Soviets, searching for a life of true freedom that belonged to them. At dawn the next morning, Wanda nervously began packing her things. She was preparing to flee with Walter. After a flurry of preparation, she carried her bag to the meeting place and waited for Walter to appear. Walter successfully stole the keys to a Soviet military vehicle, just as he was panicking and preparing to start the vehicle, then drive to the meeting point to pick up Wanda and escape the Soviets. He suddenly heard someone speak behind him. He quickly turned around in alarm. He saw his friend Wolfgang, who like him had betrayed the German army and joined the Soviets, sitting in the back seat. It turned out Wolfgang had accidentally seen Walter stealing the keys, and Walter, who had nearly died in the Soviet POW camp, had only been given the chance to join the Soviets and survive because Wolfgang had vouched for him and begged on his behalf. In other words, if Walter escaped from the Soviets, Wolfgang, as his guarantor, would definitely be punished by them. That was why Wolfgang had come. Trying to stop Walter, Walter tried every possible way to persuade Wolfgang to escape the Soviets with him, but Wolfgang, who had firmly chosen to join the Soviets, would never easily agree to Walter's request. While the two were arguing non-stop, the Soviet officer suddenly opened the vehicle door. Seeing them waiting in the vehicle so early, the Soviet officer thought they wanted to volunteer to follow him on a mission, so the officer happily took the two men out of camp to carry out the mission. Wanda, who had already been waiting at the meeting place for a long time, watched the military vehicle speed past her, but the vehicle did not stop to take her away. She was filled with confusion. She had no idea what had happened, and could only watch blankly as the vehicle gradually disappeared. Walter sat in the vehicle in a panic, anxiously looking around with no way out. These two suffering lovers, who had planned to flee together, were once again hastily separated by fate, so hastily that they did not even get to say a simple goodbye. In this chaotic age of war, every farewell could become a permanent parting, but as a small man crushed by a giant era, Walter could only accept this humble and helpless fate. And just like that, full of unwillingness and helplessness, he left Wanda and headed toward the front. By evening, the Soviet officers suddenly stopped their advance, because they had received intelligence that the bridge they had planned to cross had been blown up by the Germans and could not be used for the time being. And this place happened to be Walter's hometown. As a German born and raised in the area, Walter knew the terrain well, so he pointed out a small road the Soviet officer could use, and that small road happened to pass right by Walter's sister's farm. But at this moment, Walter never imagined that this directions would make him regret it for the rest of his life. Then the Soviet officer continued forward along the road Walter had pointed out. Soon, they saw the farm belonging to Walter's sister. The Soviet officer ordered the unit to enter the farm and rest there for the night. Seeing the dead horse at the entrance to his sister's farm, Walter's heart began to panic. He feared that something had already happened to his sister's family. Just then, someone in the farm's barn suddenly fired at him. All the Soviet soldiers immediately jumped out of the vehicle and launched a fierce counterattack against the barn. Soon, one Soviet soldier rushed beside the barn and threw a grenade inside. As the explosion rang out, the gunfire inside the barn stopped as well. Before long, two German student soldiers who looked like children, along with one old soldier, slowly walked out of the barn with their hands raised. For the first time, Walter, a German himself, pointed a gun at his former countryman, and his heart was filled with turmoil. After capturing the three German soldiers, Walter and Wolfgang began slowly entering the barn to inspect it carefully. They saw several bodies of German student soldiers lying on the ground, killed moments earlier by the grenade. Sure enough, they found another student soldier inside the barn. The terrified student soldier listened to Walter's reassurance and finally lowered his gun. He raised his hands, surrendered, and walked out of the barn. At this moment, Walter was full of confusion and worry, because he did not know where his sister's family was, or whether they were alive or dead. Helpless, he could only silently pray that his sister and her family were safe. When they crossed through the barn and reached the backyard, a gun barrel suddenly appeared from inside a house. Seeing his friend Wolfgang get shot and fall, Walter, who was on guard, immediately rushed over. He fired at the shooter with everything he had. The dense burst of bullets quickly killed the person inside. Walter held his gun and carefully pushed open the wooden door, but then he saw that the man he had just killed was actually his brother-in-law. At that moment, Walter felt the whole world spin. His regret and guilt were so overwhelming that he could barely breathe. He threw down his gun, collapsed beside his brother-in-law, and called out to him desperately, but his brother-in-law had already become a body sleeping forever. Lying motionless on the ground, Walter sat slumped beside him in grief and despair, gasping for breath. He simply could not believe that he had killed the brother-in-law who had always cared for him like an older brother, but what had already happened could never be changed. The only thing he could do now was find his sister as quickly as possible. He had to make sure she did not accidentally die under the guns of other Soviet soldiers. Thinking of this, he immediately got up in fury and ran out. He rushed into the house, calling loudly for his sister, but he never heard any response from her. Wolfgang also comforted him, saying his sister had probably already escaped and was hiding somewhere safe. Then Walter suddenly remembered the secret room his sister had worked so hard to build in the kitchen to help him dodge military service. So he quickly rushed into the kitchen, lifted the floor with all his strength, and opened the hidden room. Sure enough, inside the secret room, he saw his terrified, helpless sister. The moment she saw Walter, his sister could hardly believe it, because she had once received a death notice from the German army. The notice said that the railway patrol unit Walter belonged to had been completely wiped out by partisans. She never imagined that Walter was not only alive, but had also left the German army and become a Soviet soldier. When his sister asked where her husband was, Walter fell into deep silence. He did not know how to tell the sister who had cared for him since childhood that he had personally shot her husband dead. He stared blankly at his sister, unable to find the words. Seeing Walter remain silent, his sister immediately got up, wanting to go look for her husband. Just then, two other Soviet soldiers walked in. To calm Walter's sister, Wolfgang quickly lied and said her husband had already been taken somewhere safe. She would be able to see him soon, but his sister did not believe them, and turned to ask Walter. Helpless, Walter had to follow Wolfgang's lie to keep his sister from doing anything rash and getting herself killed. He told his sister that her husband was safe now, and that she did not need to worry. Only after hearing Walter's words did his sister quietly follow everyone and leave. After that, Walter continued fighting alongside the Soviet army. Because of the war, the siblings were dragged from place to place, each living through displacement and hardship. Walter therefore lost all news of his sister. Later, Nazi Germany announced its surrender, and the European theater of World War II finally came to an end. Walter's status also transformed overnight. From a traitor who had defected to the Soviets and betrayed Nazi Germany, he became an elite figure in the new Germany. He obtained a well-paid position in the new German government, but there was not much joy in his heart, because he had already lost everything in the war. Alone in the world, he, like many others, began searching everywhere for news of his sister and his beloved Wanda. But after staying busy for a long time, he still found no trace of his sister or Wanda. While Walter was focused on searching for his sister and Wanda, he unknowingly entered the heart of another girl. The girl cared for Walter deeply in both work and life. She even often saved fruit she could barely bear to eat and secretly gave it to Walter. In their everyday interactions, her words also revealed a deep love for him, but because Walter's heart was still fixed on his beloved Wanda, he decisively rejected the girl's affection. After that, Walter continued working for the new government while searching for news of his sister and Wanda. Walter's official job in the new German government was to issue new documents and travel permits to Germans displaced by the war. But in reality, he was helping the Soviets identify and locate Nazi party members who were trying to hide their identities. Still, because he was kind at heart, Walter believed the war was already over. He did not want to add more killing, so he often secretly let some Nazi party members who were trying to hide their identities slip through. And on this day, he unexpectedly saw the captain from his old German railway patrol unit. The captain was a genuine fanatical Nazi party member. Back then, Walter had personally seen the captain shoot an innocent civilian. At the time, as a German soldier, he had been disgusted by the captain's actions, but he had been powerless to stop him. Now, however, a single word from him might decide the captain's life or death. The captain turned his head and glanced at Walter. Walter stood motionless, staring blankly at the captain. At this moment, Walter's heart was torn. He did not know whether he should expose the captain's identity as a Nazi party member. After hesitating again and again, he chose to let the captain go. He gave the captain one chance to turn over a new leaf and start again, but what Walter did not know was that his actions had already been noticed by a co-worker. In the end, to earn credit for himself, the co-worker picked up the phone and reported to the Soviets that Walter had secretly helped Nazi party members. Fortunately, the girl who had always secretly loved Walter risked danger and brought food to warn him. Thanks to the girl's timely warning, Walter narrowly escaped being arrested by the Soviets. With no one to depend on here, the girl also chose to flee with Walter. After countless hardships, they finally crossed the border successfully and entered Allied-occupied West Germany. Because relations between the two major international blocs were extremely tense at the time, Walter's arrival in West Germany meant he would never again be able to meet his beloved woman or his sister, and Walter spent the rest of his life never finding his sister. Later, he married the girl who had secretly loved him in West Germany, had children, and built a family, until one night more than 10 years later, he unexpectedly saw Wanda, the woman he had never stopped thinking about, on television. The moment he saw Wanda, all of his memories came rushing back.
Miłość tak pięknie tłumaczy, choćbyś ją przeklął w rozpaczy. Miłość ci wszystko wybaczy, gdy pokochasz tak mocno jak ja, tak tkliwie, żarliwie.
Walter, his heart in turmoil, got up and ran out of the room, driving alone through the dark night. And this man who had always been strong was now already in tears. War is never just about killing and death. It carves pain deep into people's flesh and memory for the rest of their lives. Shrapnel may be removed, and wounds on the body may heal, but the grief embedded in the nerves of those who live through it can never truly be pulled out. So-called war survivors are often only survivors in body, because their souls and minds were shattered by gunfire long ago. And long ago, they were crushed beyond recognition by the war.